sì, io cerco di arrabattarmi e di fare il possibile, però più di così non riesco.
C'è qualche
No.
problema?
E c'è stato un problema con la telecamera, la videocamera. E non si apre la videocamera, però le
Non si
slide.
vede poi le cose che vogliono vedere.
Sì, no, quelle si vedono, si sente e si vedono bene. L'unica cosa è che c'è stato un problema. Io tra l'altro non sono pratico, ho chiamato Saul Carassale e anche lui per telefono non è riuscito Però comunque abbiamo registrato tutto, le slide si vedono, infatti noi qua ora stiamo vedendo
Insomma, le rivelazioni ci sono.
sì, ci sono, c'è tutto. Va bene. Sì.
Can we have more light than that? No, but I don't care. This is fine. Yeah, this is good. This will be good. Yeah. Okay. Oh, no, bene.
Dennis, when you are ready, I'm ready too.
Okay.
We are 1 minute.
Okay, can we put that, the slideshow up? I'm ready as soon as it's on the screen.
I don't see where. What is this? Power presenter?
I don't know, but we put it on here earlier.
Yes, but lo vediamo, no? Non lo vede.
Questo?
Guarda un po' qui cos'è.
No, sai che forse questa porta non funziona, la proviamo a mettere di qua.
Sì.
Vediamo. Quello che cos'era?
Il mouse.
Ah, ecco.
Funziona uguale.
Perché prima.
Adesso si accende qualcosa.
Allora,
Vediamo se vedi qualcosa sulla scrivania. Che non so come si chiama. There is a name for this. How is called in the computer?
Social
Coding.
and some.
Eccolo qua.
L'hai trovato?
Is
l'aveva
this
già caricato.
social?
Buono. Allora
Was
carica.
already charged
Sì.
before?
No,
No.
il suo marito.
Okay.
Ah, ok.
Fai.
Questo?
Sì. Abbiamo solo ora da mettere presentazione lassù, no? Sai come si fa? Sì.
Sì, questa. Is this?
Okay.
Ok.
Okay.
Look at. It's fine?
Yeah. It's
Okay.
fine. Okay.
See you time.
Sure. Okay.
We open the after the session, the last session. We have only presentation, and then we have general assembly. Before the general assembly, there is a very short salutation from the Vice President of Accademia, 2 minutes, and then we open the plenary, the assembly session, and then we have the last coffee break in the hotel. Okay? Please.
Okay. So I'm picking up on some issues that are related to issues that Almo and Valerio spoke of yesterday with regard to tourist coding and social problems. So anyway, I'm going to alarm you and to leave you indignant, and then at the end I'll give you some hope. Okay. So the United States and other countries with which it shares some cultural and linguistic coding are currently facing a set of enormous social problems. Many diagnoses at many different levels of analysis have been made of these mammoth problems, but generally in very piecemeal ways, and often not just with the disappointing lack of actionable responses, but worse, with the implementation of policies that have only exacerbated the issue. The role of cultural coding and sometimes the role of linguistic coding shape the possibility space for addressing such problems. But because the importance of this coding has gone unnoticed, potential routes for addressing these ills have been overlooked. While it's true that much social coding and linguistic coding happens organically and outside of deliberate control, there is significant evidence to show that deliberate coding happens as well. As I worked with one of my honors thesis students this year on a topic that leaned heavily on Wittgenstein's philosophical investigations, it became clear to me that although these codes arise organically within forms of life, that's the Wittgensteinian sort of way of understanding it. All codes have to do with how organisms are interacting with each other. And forms of life specifically for Wittgenstein obviously has to do with humans only. But anyway, of course they evolve naturally, but sometimes they're developed on purpose by industries, policymakers, advertisers, as well as on occasion by conscious campaigns by community members. Yes? Yes, I will. Okay. Happy to do so. So what I'm going to do, I will use 3 examples of alarming public health phenomena to illustrate how understanding the roles that social and linguistic coding plays in the development of and failure to successfully address social problems, they could help us more mindfully respond to issues that otherwise seem quite intractable. To begin then, obesity has been a growing problem around the world for the past 40 years. Worldwide obesity numbers have tripled since 1990, and they've quadrupled for adolescents in that time period. In the United States, over 2/3 of the population is clinically overweight or obese. And while we might say, well, okay, that's fine, weight in itself isn't so bad, the problems associated with this shift include rampant rates of diabetes, heart disease, cancer, and dementia, all associated with the activity of excess visceral fat. While proximally obesity can straightforwardly be explained by an imbalance between energy input and energy expenditures, stopping there leaves us with virtually no explanation of the epidemiology of the sudden rise in the phenomenon. Ubiquitous availability of ultra-processed, hyper-palatable foods, which, by the way, makes up 70 to 80% of the American, they call it standard American diet, which is SAD, S-A-D. Those hyper-palatable, ultra-processed fake foods only make up about 15% of the food, the calories consumed in Italy. So it doesn't have to be like that. It's not that everywhere. Most of Europe does way better than the United States. But this is what floods the market, right? Food that's not food, together with urbanization and technological changes in the way work and school happen, have made this imbalance between energy input and output nearly inevitable. Much research released in the last decade indicates that these highly lab-formulated foods have the same addictive properties that are attributed to tobacco, alcohol, cocaine, and opiates. At the same time, though, compassionate insistence on avoiding shaming people based on body size, along with the trend of increase of average BMI, have resulted in a shift in both social and linguistic coding in this area. For example, we no longer say that people are obese. Instead, we say that people have obesity. And on the other hand, in order to capture market share, mannequins in clothing stores in the United States are now much larger than they've ever been, and larger than ones that I've seen here as I was walking through the town. So, the idea is, right, to show shoppers, normalize shopper size so that shoppers will be comfortable buying clothes. And that's all good from one perspective. Self-acceptance is important to well-being. But these changes in social and linguistic coding with respect to obesity have significantly increased the risk of all 4 diseases mentioned above, as well as increasing risk of all-cause mortality. Social and linguistic coding with respect to these issues has resulted, in particular in Quick Fix America, in the concept of obesity as a disease that just happens and that cannot be avoided through ordinary means, but must be treated pharmaceutically. So guess what's coming next? As we all know, these glucagon-like peptide receptor agonists, the GLP-1, like the semaglutide formulations Ozempic and Wegovy, have become all the rage for addressing this problem. Semaglutides mimic GLP-1 receptors in the body, prompting increased production of insulin, which lowers blood sugar and increases sensitivity to insulin, which in turn diminishes diabetes symptoms and diabetes-related complications, including kidney failure and fatty liver disease. So it seems to be a good drug. But the real news, at least in the United States, is that it can be prescribed off-label for weight loss. And that's what's prompted the colossal sale of these drugs. Semaglutide slows the rate at which the stomach empties, leaving people feeling full so that they have less appetite and they lose weight. These drugs hit the world by storm as soon as they made it to the market in 2017, largely driven by demand in the United States. Ozempic accounted for more than 65% of total prescriptions written in 2022. And, of course, we all know 58% of Novo Nordisk's profits last year. That's what allowed Denmark's economy to expand 2%, which, in the same period was 4 times more than anybody else in Europe. That's a lot of weight loss customers. But the customers aren't in Denmark or even in the United States. 85% of those profits are coming from the United States. But all that weight loss comes at significant costs. For one thing, because semaglutide makes the stomach empty more slowly than usual, and many it leads to extra pressure inside the abdomen, stretching of the nerves in the gut, which in many patients triggers unpleasant side effects like nausea, vomiting, and stomach pain. Long-term effects of using these drugs are, of course, unknown because they're new. But what is known is that people very often stop using these drugs because you have to inject them once per week. And so there are side effects, there's the inconvenience of injecting yourself, and it's expensive. So when people stop taking the injections, however, the weight in the vast majority of cases immediately returns. And what makes matters worse is that unless a strict exercise regimen is taken up along with the drug, the weight loss associated with the use of semaglutides is usually largely muscle instead of fat. But then the regained weight is fat, not muscle. So patients who then but then they stop the semaglutides end up much worse off metabolically than they were to begin with. Novo Nordisk packaging itself says these are lifetime drugs, and it warns of the dangerous metabolic implications of stopping the drug. What makes all of this worse is that parents of obese children are rushing to put their children in this lifetime injectable drug without any knowledge of what harm they might be doing to them in the long run, not to mention committing them without their consent to a lifetime drug regimen. To top it off, the medical establishment is on board. The American Academy of Pediatrics has recommended these drugs rather than training in principles of exercise and nutrition as the first line of treatment for significant overweight in children over 12, even while the ultra-processed foods and the soda machines fill the cafeterias in the U.S. schools and recess and physical education have been removed for cost reasons. But will the recoding of obesity as a disease to be managed with pharmaceuticals help anything? My suspicion is that it might do the opposite. To think through this, let's look at how other drugs prescribed for chronic illnesses associated with health habits have worked. As it turns out, the development and widespread use of such medications have not at all diminished the occurrence of the diseases that they were created to treat. Consider, for example, statins, developed for cholesterol management, metformin for insulin resistance, and diabetes, and, as well as antidepressants and anti-anxiety meds. In each of these cases, the maladies that the drugs were developed to treat have become more prevalent since the drugs were introduced. Cardiovascular disease, diabetes, other metabolic disorders, as well as anxiety and depression have all increased significantly over the past 2 decades, even as prescriptions provided to treat these drugs have become nearly ubiquitous. One of the thing that I think is the problem is that when the answer is in prescribing a pharmaceutical for an illness, then any effort, any incentive to attempt to do away with the illness is disincentivized in favor of, oh, well, we can just take this, we can just do that, and then the disease itself increases in its prevalence. And so because people feel, well, it won't kill me because I can take this for that, but then we end up with much higher medical costs all the way across. I'm not going to do the examples, but you see how that can work. Okay, that's one kind of case. Now, here's another kind of example. This time one that shows how confusion and incomplete shifts in social coding has served to perpetuate a different epidemic, which is also of unprecedented proportions. In a rampant plague that seems like it just won't go away, substance abuse, in particular opioid use, is killing millions around the world. In recent years, about 110,000 people a year have been dying in the US from drug overdoses. 3/4 of those were from opioid overdoses, and this is a problem that's been growing steadily for nearly 30 years. The largest increases, change that, okay. The largest increases, however, occurred through the pandemic years, making death by overdose more likely than death by automobile crashes or gun violence. David Cutler, a world-renowned healthcare economist, recently stated that opioids are the most abused substance in the history of the world. And of course that makes sense because poppy-derived substances have been used for millennia, but it's really from the time that Purdue Pharmacy started selling OxyContin for pain in the 1990s as an allegedly less addictive formulation than previous opium-derived compounds, which it is not, the number of people experiencing addiction and death from opioid use began to increase steadily, especially in the last 20 years. This was after the second Bush administration signed the Medicare Prescription Drug Improvement and Modernization Act, which authorized payment for prescription drugs by Medicare. That's the U.S.'s national health insurance for senior citizens. By 2006, that program was up and running, and it only took a couple of years before pain clinics began delivering as many as 1 million pills to towns with tiny populations, particularly in Florida. And sometimes town would have a population of 350, and they're delivering 1 million of these pills to those towns. So naturally, policymakers began to react. Clinics began to be shut down. More legislation was introduced, creating draconian measures to punish the doctors and the pharmacists for providing legal opioids, with the expected result that heroin deaths then began to rise rapidly, as people from all walks of life moved into the streets to find their way find their pain relief. And by the way, the largest percentage increase in overdose from 2020 to 2021 in the US was age 65 and older. So, in the third wave of this epidemic, the synthetic opiate fentanyl, a drug that had been used for decades in hospitals and still is for intractable cancer pain and some surgeries, began to be manufactured illegally. It always was legal, now you got an illegal version. Fentanyl is 20 to 40 times more potent than heroin and 100 times more potent than morphine. And herein lies the key to the overdose death problem. With every one of these major increases in potency comes a greater risk of death from each use. So death numbers and addiction numbers don't track like you might think they would. By 2019, fentanyl became to be found in all kinds of black market drugs, including heroin, cocaine, counterfeit Vicodin, OxyContin, oxycodone, and all of that. So people who didn't believe themselves to be fentanyl users nevertheless were dying from it. So by 2021, the number of people who died from opiate overdose was 6 times as many as died in 1999. Now, surely the pandemic had a significant effect on those numbers of users, as it did for lots of other substances. Alcohol, for example, use went high during the pandemic, but those numbers for other substances began to decrease as the effects of the pandemic began to fade, only not for opiate numbers. Purdue Pharmaceuticals, and here's sort of an analysis of that, right, is a social coating that was sold and bought and disastrously. In the 1990s, Purdue Pharmaceuticals marketed very, very aggressively nearly 100 million opiate pills to American physicians who were sold on a social code according to which pain is a vital statistic to be measured at every appointment along with your blood pressure and your temperature. And so the rallying cry was, you must stay ahead of your pain. The market then was created that allowed for the horrifying numbers of people suffering and dying from the use of these substances. But then when Congress reacted by instituting a new set of criminal laws with respect to legal versions, the country was primed for a gargantuan increase in potential for illegal drug use. The shifting and conflicting social codes that have emerged over the past 30 years with respect to opiates, from criminal menace to necessary medicine to black market necessity for people of all ages, with still a taint of shame and criminality remained incorporated. Most recently, in response to this situation and to overloaded courts and jails, the clear failure of law enforcement approaches to address the opioid epidemic, the state of Oregon in 2020 decriminalized possession and use of most drugs. However, unlike Portugal, which famously managed to change social coding and substance addiction from framing it as a criminal issue to treating it as an illness, with fairly dramatic success, and that's notwithstanding, this partial return recent years to some drug-related problems. Portugal still has the lowest drug-related death rate in Europe. But Oregon's measures stalled out. Follow through on the key components of treatment and social support was very slow, while attitudes and blame and shame continued to be promulgated. And so the code shifting was never completed. With penalties removed and no infrastructure for approaching addiction as a disease in place, public drug use and associated crimes skyrocketed, with the result that Oregon in recent months has recently recriminalized possession of most drugs. Decriminalization advocates argue that the change in approach didn't succeed because of Oregon's failures to fund any new treatment services for 18 months after the law had passed, as well as failing completely to train police on their new role in this understanding of dealing with addiction, or provide any means to address drug users to treatment. So these advocates also respond to those who blame that ballot measure for rising drug use and homelessness by pointing instead to an unaffordable housing market exacerbated by the pandemic, and in addition to the arrival of fentanyl and the illicit version of fentanyl on the West Coast in 2020, which was several years after it had been already ravaging the rest of the country. But whatever ultimately happens in Oregon, two general conclusions seem warranted. First, coding drug addiction and death as criminal behavior has done nothing to reduce the drug problem in the U.S. In fact, its greatest growth spurts have come since the war on drugs was instigated. Second, failures to address the ubiquitous problem of unhoused persons in cities across the country only perpetuates another kind of social coding that seems pernicious to solving any social problems. Skewed perceptions of freedom, choice, and responsibility. Homelessness, as well as substance addiction, according to this coding, is a function of individual choice and responsibility, as are unemployment, underemployment, childhood, hunger, and death by firearms. And that brings us to our third and final example of unfortunate social coding. In this case, it's an enduring coding that's actually contradicted by consistent public polling. In the US, there's a well-recognized and actually a pretty jaw-dropping public health issue associated with gun violence. Our children are trained in active shooter drills from the time they're in pre-kindergarten because there have been over 100 school shootings per year since 2018, with nearly 2,000 last year. Teachers in Tennessee have been authorized to bring guns into their classrooms, and more states are considering the same policy. Further, in addition to weekly school shootings, which on the face of it shouldn't seem just unfortunate, but it ought to seem incredible, 654 mass shootings were recorded across the United States in 2023 alone. 45,000 gun-related deaths were reported in a total for last year. And this is just a scatter graph of shootings that happened in my town there's the change from 2020 to 2023 by block, because there are sufficient numbers of them that you can do it by block in your town. Most sadly of all, death by firearms in the United States is now the leading cause of death in children from birth to 19 years. It's the only country in its income group to have anything like that. Clearly, gun violence in the United States must have to do with the fact that there are more than 400 million guns in the country, which is more than twice as many of any of its closest runners-up. But the number of guns hasn't risen randomly. Gun sales in the United States predictably increase after mass shootings, as activities by the National Rifle Association, other conservative political groups and organizations promote the idea that loss of the Second Amendment right to bear arms is imminent at any moment. In fact, just last month in Colorado, known to be a more liberal state in the nation, 2 proposed laws to very minimally limit the sale of automatic rifles failed to pass in the state Senate. As some have put it, guns are woven into the fabric of American consciousness. Why? Well, gun ownership in the United States is coded as integral to the notion of freedom. It's social, and I knew that was going to happen because that was my shocking photo. Damn. Okay, forget it. It was just a giant American flag with a bunch of guns and ammo on the front of it. Because we have those pictures all over everywhere. Those images, yeah. Maybe it's rebelling against showing anybody that. It's fair. Anyway, but the point is that this is the code, right? It means, guns mean freedom. It's this social and linguistic coding that make it impossible for any politician to advocate gun control, even considering all the pediatric deaths by firearms. Further, even if we don't count the pandemic years, it's pretty stunning to see that the suicide rate for young people tripled from 2007 to 2018, and it has continued to rise ever since then. 2022 marks the highest number of gun-related suicides on record, so people are not having a militia to shoot other people, they're having guns and they're shooting themselves. And children, people get killed by accidents too. The CDC shows that firearms are driving the overall suicide numbers in the United States in recent years. While some states and some individuals have attempted to recast the gun deaths issue as a public health issue, the voting public seems to cling to the idea that gun ownership, no matter what its dangers, is a cornerstone of American freedom. So, what I've hoped to show here is just some examples of what can happen through unfortunate, sometimes vacillating, but sometimes unyielding social coding. I suggest that only through examining and intervening in social coding will be able to address problems of the magnitude of those that we've seen. While, as I've admitted at the beginning of this talk, social coding and linguistic coding often occur organically and in some ways are essentially the results of organic processes. Since the rules connecting words and social interactions are those that exist between people, objects, events, other parts of the human condition, and the meanings that they convey are arbitrary, it would seem that they can change either spontaneously or deliberately. The subfield of conceptual engineering and philosophy shows that the latter can and does exist as much as the former. This movement in philosophy, in contrast to the standard conceptual analysis that's been popular for 100 years, this conceptual engineering focuses on how to best assess and improve our conceptual schemes. From this perspective, crafting concepts we ought to use could offer valuable assistance in addressing the kinds of problems that I've outlined here. By shaping the discourse used at the highest levels of analysis, so changes in health practices through changes in social coding, it's been done before. It can happen. It happened with tobacco. With respect to cigarette use in particular, we saw that what once seemed to be a ubiquitous fact of life and then an intractable public health problem has largely been resolved. In the United States and Western Europe, smoking's down more than 50% from where it was in the middle of the last century. This was due largely to deliberate campaigns to change social coding. So careful thought and active participation by citizen groups, medical institutions, professionals, policymakers, as well as social media influence, I'm going to say, could, if the will were there, turn around some of the public health problems that most threaten everybody's well-being. Thank you. Some references.
Thank you, Candice. Perfectly fine.
Nobody else? Candice, thank you very much. Aside from this massive indictment of American society,
It was just 3 examples, and as it turned out, they seemed to be, but my data's from the US.
Massive. The subliminal sort of national code, to me, seems to be, or you implied it, that you're not responsible for what you have, because it's the linguistic term makes it that you have it rather than that you own it, that it's your responsibility. That's pervasive, isn't it?
I think in most things, right? With the health-related illnesses, right? I think that's the case.
But for instance, the tobacco, you brought up tobacco.
Yeah.
But they blame the tobacco industry rather than the individuals who chose to
Absolutely.
smoke.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But the interesting thing about that for me is that this coexistence, juxtaposition in the coding in the Americas is with the focus on the individual and freedom. And freedom, don't tell me not to eat my French fries, don't tell me what to eat, and don't tell me what it should be, right? So this freedom doesn't come with responsibility in the same way, right, that typically in ethical systems, freedoms and responsibilities are correlatives. But not in this system.
In the social fabric.
No, it's built into the social fabric, right? We want to have the freedom to have all of these guns. It's not it's not our fault that our children are killing themselves with them. Really? I mean, that's just all the demands with none of the responsibilities.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you so much. You used the example of tobacco, War Against Tobacco, as a successful case of changing this social code, and it's a very good example also for its intrusive presence some years ago, and now it's strong, massive reduction. I was curious about your personal opinion regarding the idea to take that very same methodology and apply that to other area of social coding, or on the contrary, to find a very similar homolog working mechanism for other areas, for example, obesity, health, or organs, for example. So to apply that very same pattern of social recoding, or on the other hand, to find new homolog patterns that would work in the specific field.
Right, so the conceptual engineers are interested in actually doing the research to find out which versions of concepts, or similar concepts, could be introduced, right? So it's a matter of shifting the meaning from a positive valence to a negative valence, or from a happy valence or to a dangerous valence. So taking, did you say homologs? Because it is something like that's what I'm thinking, yeah. That conceiving, creating concepts so that the associations are different. Because here's one thing, I mean, just think, there are some people who think that gun deaths are a matter of public health. Some people think that gun deaths are just an unfortunate side effect of all freedom. Like everybody's got everybody, but of course that view is false because everybody's not dying everywhere else. And so the idea that we could, it's a normative practice, right? To develop concepts in a way, and just in the same way it was very mindfully done with tobacco, but it starts with you can't smoke in the hospital. Then you can't smoke outside the hospital. Then you have to smoke separately from children in the restaurants. Then you have to, which was never a thing, right? Because it would be that piece of glass that smoke was right over the top. But then it was, you have to go outside. And the more, I mean, in the same way that social influencers work through some sort of tipping point, it seems to be possible to change an overall framing of a particular activity, smoking from being Virginia Slims and a woman's independence, right? They use these on Independence Day to show women's independence, is now a health hazard to everybody, particularly women and the babies that they may be carrying. And so I think, yeah, just like that.
Thank you so much.
And then they show ads of people with emphysema.
Well, right, and I think that European countries, and I know also in Brazil, they're not afraid to show warning signs on sugary, dye-colored children's cereals, because it's not really food and it's dangerous. But, right.
Okay. Question? Yes? Shortly.
So no scientific base, just an impression that people who quit smoking, they do it out of a wish for greater freedom. I don't want to be a slave of my cigarette. I want to be able to control myself. Rather than laws forbidding, that helps. But so just like for the same reason one wishes to have a gun. So,
Yeah, I mean, and also with, go ahead.
So what has happened, if that is correct, is that one has superseded a code by means of a greater code, not by inventing a new one.
I like that. No, I like it because of the Sherlock Holmes analogy thing that you were doing earlier, and I think that's right. I was going to say to you earlier that I think that uncertainty, which is not a matter of probabilities, but a matter of increasing and divergent framings, I think that is exactly right. And that's the way that conceptual engineers are looking to shift the framing of certain concepts that are very important, which if they could catch on would be for our greater good. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.
The last but not the least, Marino, please.
Thank you.
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. So the title of my paper should be Facial Codes. From physiognomy to semiotics, but actually it could be as well facial codes with a question mark from physiognomy to semiotics, and in truth I think it could be turned into what can code biology do for social semiotics, because I'm very glad to be here, but I'm a total newbie in code biology, so this is not a paper in code biology, but rather maybe on code biology. And I stepped into code biology. I'm interested in code biology because I am a semiotician. Actually, my point is twofold. I want to use a little bit of code biology in order to strengthen some studies of mine, but at the same time, I'm very interested in putting code biology in the, maybe, in my perspective, wider realm of semiotics. So this is what I will try to do. By semiotics, I mean something which actually today is really hyper-specialized, and this is not a good a good thing in my view. What I do is something that is being called in Italy, in France, in Spain, in Latin America, social semiotics, which is a tricky word because we already have social semiotics, which is much more famous, the one by M.A.K. Halliday, but this is completely different, so this is a first issue. And actually, social semiotics displays a very typical cliche of semiotics, of being really meta, a really meta discipline and meta discourse, because actually social semiotics is just what Ferdinand de Saussure prophetically said about semiology in 1916. So a discipline studying the life of science in the realm, in the framework of social life. But the history of semiotics was very not a straight line, and at a certain point actually semioticians detached as a project from this prophecy of Saussure, and for example in the 70s semiotics became a really formalistic discipline, so really separated from society. So the idea is to bring back society into science. And in particular, social semiotics again is a really meta discipline because it does not study society per se, but rather how society self-represents itself in forms of pieces of culture. So, for example, if we want to study migration, we do not do, thanks Almo, we do not do only necessarily ethnographic work, but we study media representation of migration, for example, in movies or in novels, etc. So, my personal lineage of semiotics comes from Saussure, so not Peirce, and then it developed into what we called generative structuralism, so Greimas and all his pupils, but obviously we are not in the 70s and not in the 80s, so I think that a small correction to this paradigm was fundamental, and that's why I put a little pinch of Umberto Eco, Yuri Lotman, Genet and Barthes in this main framework, which is the post-Greimasian framework. I just wanted to put some super small definitions in order to make it clear, which is my epistemological position. For me, a sign is mainly a difference out of which we can become capable of making inferences, and which is why a sign is the vehicle of value, what we linguistically call value, which is by definition something stemming from difference. Meaning, this is the main point in my opinion. Meaning is autonomous. I mainly study artifacts, not natural phenomena, and the idea is that the meaning of, for example, a text, a written text, a movie, a tune, real-life interaction in a supermarket is something that is completely detached from intentions of the people involved or of the creator of the text. This is obviously an ideology of meaning, I'm perfectly aware of that. And another key point is that meaning is story-based or story poetic, I would say, because it's narrative. So my idea of meaning is that it's, in a nutshell, even in a nutshell, built through a story. Okay, these are the topics that I mainly dealt with in my career, but lately, oh sorry, yes, this is my main proposal for this short paper. So why I'm interested in code biology? Because on the one hand, I'm really interested in the theories and in the history and in the general epistemology of what we could call semiotic theories in general, without putting them all in the realm of what semiotics is and try to build up some lineages, some genealogies, what author influenced another author and stuff like that. I'm interested in this kind of theoretical and historical kink in semiotics. And on the other hand, I'm really interested in try and find some possible application, obviously, of code biology in what I do in my everyday research, which mainly focused up to now on music and on digital communication. So, lately, my main object of study was the human face, because I've been part of a project called Facets, which is based in Turin, and it's a ERC European project, and it lasted for 4 or 5 years or something like that. And so the idea was to study how technologies affected the perception, the definition, the meaning, the value, the social interaction related to the face. And the first interesting thing that I discovered is that the face is, paradoxically speaking, is a very neglected object, dismissed object from the perspective of semiotics, because the face is everywhere, so you study the face a little bit in order to study other things, but there was no such a thing as a semiotics of the face, so we had to build up the pieces that were fragmented in very different contributions from very different authors. And obviously, the most important thing in my constructivist perspective was that there is no such a thing as the face as well. We have very different ideologies of the face regarding different chronological and geographical contexts, and this is something that we had to address. I mainly studied the representation of the face in very different fashions, from emojis to obviously pictorial representations, for example, of musicians and how their face is represented. And I was really interested in a Lotmanian way, I would say, in the idea of denegating the face. So I studied masking, anonymity. Obviously, I studied the pandemic issue of the medical face mask, and so yesterday we were discussing about Giorgio Agamben, and so also the positions of Giorgio Agamben in this respect. And I studied what we normally call disfigurement, but in the contemporary jargon is called visible difference. So people with strong issues regarding the aesthetics and the functioning of the face, which we generally call disfigurement. So, limit case study of the face. What I discovered is that we cannot get rid of the ontology of the face, obviously, but at the same time, the face for us is such a strong semiotic device, not because it's compulsory, mandatory presence in our everyday life as an ontological piece of the world, but rather precisely because it's a construction, precisely because it's something ephemeral, very conventional, that changes a lot, that can be affected by very different features and incidents of very different kinds. Okay, I will skip this. I tried to make a scrutiny, a review of the main sources that I could find in code biology, and obviously in the incredible database that was prepared by Robert Prince and that we can find on the code biology website, but also in the latest book by Professor Barbieri. there is an incredible review of all the codes from the biological realm to the cultural one. And I tried to find things, my cup of teas in this respect, so in this huge list. And I was intrigued on the one hand of finding Mark Raybrook paper, because Mark is the specialist of musical semiotics, and in particular the linking between musical semiotics and embodiment and then activism, and he's also a friend, so I was amused by this inclusion. And obviously I searched for the face, and there is just one token explicitly addressing the topic of the face in this database, which is super interesting because it works precisely on what has been the main issue in formulating hypotheses regarding the fact that we can read the face as a codical device, as something dealing with codes, or at the same time if the face itself has got a code of some kind. And this paper is very interesting, and it suggests that not only we can recognize the face according to very different strategies, but in particular that we have really specialized strategies that, for example, are related to the sex of the face of the person that we are called to recognize. So there is a subspecialization regarding sexuality, which is something that was not expectable, theoretically speaking, because the structure of the face is not so different from male or female, but evidently we focus on this detail, on this dimension, on this aspect in a particular way, in a detection way. So the face is an issue, definitely it's an issue. There are tons of studies from psychology to medical studies, stricto sensu, addressing the fact that the face for the human being is something special. And the idea is to try and find why it's so special regarding the fact that we try to anthropomorphize all the things that we want to have a relation with. It's a form of pareidolia in a certain way. So we crave the face in order to find the main semiotic device, which is relationship between elements. So the face is an issue, and there is a huge debate about this specificity of the face. And for example, in this beautiful book from 1991, experimental studies demonstrate that actually there is a kind of momentum of the child towards the face that may be pre-communicational by definition, but also pre-linguistic and pre-conscious, which is something really interesting because it would question the codicality of the face. So, speaking of codicality, one cannot fail to mention physiognomy. Physiognomy is the idea, is a code ideology by definition, because it's the idea that we can pair, that we can put together what Hjelmslew would call a side of the expression, which is the face, and a side of the content, which is the character, the personality of the person that we are studying. Physiognomy was engineered between the 16th century and up to the late positivism, but actually there are roots in physiognomy that date back to the ancient Greece in very different context, but these are the main authors: Giambattista della Porta, Lavater, Gall, Galton, and we arrive to contemporary positivism in the late 18th century. So it's a ideology of the code, or it's a system of value that are focusing on the idea of code, and this idea started contaminating culture slowly to the extent that we could step from physiognomy to what I would call, because this is a neologism, I guess, pathognomy, from pathos, from passion, from emotions. So there is this kind of ideological codical system putting together the side of the expression, the face, and the content. So the meaning related to the face, so the character in case of physiognomy, but we can do the same also with punctual expression, not character, which is something lasting in time, but rather emotions. And the main scholar in this field, really controversial, was and is Paul Ekman, who, funnily enough, started his career in 1978 publishing an article in a collected, in a book edited by Sibeok. So it's interesting to see this kind of intertwinings between semiotics and these parasemiotic systems of thought. So, by definition, this way of building up interpretative model, like physiognomy or pathognomy, it's by definition a semiotic way of reasoning. So, putting expression and content together, thinking that beneath what we call the level of manifestation, there is a deeper level of deep structures. So, this is semiotic reasoning 101. But at the same time, this may suggest that, to a certain extent, meaning is a kind of apophenia. It's a kind of, apophenia is the hypernym of pareidolia, so the idea that you put together random stimuli, a pattern, not a pattern, random stimuli, and mistaking them for patterns. So it's the tendency to find meaning, to find patterns in random data. And pareidolia is a case, is a visual case in this respect. And a lot of semiotic authors, from Eco to Jorge Lozano, actually suggest the idea that the guy, the person, the form of life, I would say, of someone who wants to find a perfect consistency in the world, so wants to find meaning in everything, so by definition the conspiracy theorist is just a mad semiotician, someone that wants the system to work perfectly, whereas we perfectly know that the system doesn't work so perfectly. I will skip some details regarding the study of the face because it's not my focus, but the idea is that slowly physiognomy was dismissed as something as pseudo-scientifical, but still there is, like in every context that produces social codes, we have this kind of resurrections of trends that happens every once in a while. And so, for example, in 2017, a psychological article was published actually proposing the idea of a physiognomy 2.0, because a very powerful neural network trained on billions of pictures would be allegedly capable of recognizing the gender, not the sexual, but yes, the sexual and gender tendencies of a person in a more accurate way than a human being. So this was described in the press, in the media, as the AI gay detector or something like that, just from the face, just from a picture, okay? And obviously a lot of ethical concerns were raised starting from this paper. But again, there is the idea that we can build, that we can rely upon a kind of physiognomy to a certain extent. So, what are the things that interest me the most in the code biology paradigm? Obviously, and I will develop this part in a few slides, the idea to recover the notion of code. I say recover because in contemporary semiotics the term code has been dismissed, and this is a problem in my view, because actually semiotics was a powerful discipline where it was the discipline of the code, and now it's way weaker. And Professor Barbieri addressed this in the talk that he held here a few days ago. There is a kind of prophetic momentum in some theoretical constructions that only later were confirmed by experimental pragmatical proof. And this is something interesting in a philosophical perspective, because we can find this pattern, this I would say theoretical abduction in a certain sense, in very different authors, but the theories of whom were confirmed afterwards. So they had the intuition to see the right direction. It's the case of Merleau-Ponty with embodiment and then activism. He already said the things that we know experimentally in the 80s. He said those things in the 40s. Luigi Cavalli Sforza already intuited that were patterns, parallelism between nature and culture. Obviously, Dawkins was addressed a few minutes before, the idea that we may treat culture in a very similar way than nature. And also, this is a quotation from Semiotica e Filosofia del Linguaggio, Semiotics and Philosophy of Language by Eco, 1984, which is very interesting because it says that Giorgio Prodi already suggested that code was not a metaphor, but rather something coming from the cellular work, and that we could apply to the realm of culture. And Eco, which was a trickster, a textual trickster, added that we can reverse the process. So actually, a code is established in the moment of reading, not in the moment of writing. This is like boutade by Eco, but it is just because the theory of Eco is precisely this perspective on reading and on interpreting text, and as a matter of fact is called the cooperative interpretation process. So that there is something in the reader that has to be put together with the text or with the phenomenon that we are interested in order to make the semiosis work. In a couple of minutes, I guess I will finish. I'm talking since 20 minutes. Okay, thank you. So, these are the things that interest me the most. Obviously, the idea that this could be not a holistic, but definitely a systemic perspective of on very different phenomena. Obviously, it's particularly interesting for me as a semiotician, the way in which language is problematized by code biology. And the most important thing, obviously, it's not the code per se, because the code is the vehicle of some things that happen from biology to culture, but rather the notion of arbitrariness, which is the key point in structural semiotics since Saussure up to today, even though many semioticians would not agree today on this point. So the idea that there is a convention, that a code is the linking between two different realms, two different areas, that works by convention, that it's completely ruled by arbitrariness. And obviously another thing that interests me as a fan of the history of semiotics is the intellectual network in which code biology was brought to light in the mid-80s, in the first version as a semantic theory of evolution, so semantic biology. For example, it was particularly intriguing for me reading the preface that René Thom wrote of the book by Professor Barbieri in 1985, because René Thom is a really interesting figure for semiotics, because he was a semiotician, but obviously he was a mathematician, and obviously was the theorist of the catastrophe theory. So I will go very quick. I will spare you the definition of codex, but it would have been useful with a general public audience to address also these. So, a very super short history of code within semiotics. Obviously, everything in this case starts off with Saussure, but Saussure does not talk about code, obviously. Saussure talks about lang, but we just can paraphrase what Saussure says, translate Saussure, and that's what the first structuralist did, from Jacobson to Lévi-Strauss. So what Saussure describes as the lang, the system of relationships, is the code, the system, or the structure. And this is what I was addressing before, the golden age of semiotics, when semiotics was, some said, used to say that semiotics has this imperialistic approach to everything. It wanted to apply the structuralism methodology to anything. And that was precisely thanks to the notion of code. At a certain point in time in the 70s, semiotics was a theory of codes, the code of music, the code of cinema, oftentimes with a substitution of code with language, but the meaning was precisely the same. The idea of finding a specific code for any possible field of human experience. And this is echo again from the philosophy and semiotics and the philosophy of language, addressing the success of the notion of code in a really funny way. So saying that the code was the Kunstwollen of semiotics before the end of the 70s, and again giving a really general, hyper-general definition of code. So convention, rules, not necessarily related to a communicative intent in a strict sense. And then this is the end. At a certain point in time, the notion of code degraded in semiotics. Eco, who was the epitome of the code semiotics, after the book A Theory of Semiotics, dismisses the notion in favor of encyclopedia because he was influenced by Deleuze, and he was much more interested in trying and find a balance with the pragmatics of the semiotic system. Garroni dismisses the notion of code, and obviously Greimas does the same. And this is like a really interesting path in the history of semiotics, because something that was very mainstream, important, and focal a few years afterwards became completely forbidden. So, to conclude, it's a very simple conclusion, it's a very auto-evident conclusion. I'm really interested in code biology because obviously there are possible exchanges between semiotics, the semiotics that I practice, and code biology today in the respect of specific limited applications to some fields of study, for example the face, something that I have to deepen further, obviously. But at the same time, my idea is to include code biology in the wider history of semiotic thinking, in the history of semiotic theories, precisely relying upon not the notion of code per se, but rather arbitrariness, which is the most important, in my view. If I would make, if I had to make a semiotic analysis of the text by Professor Barbieri or Almofarina or other theorists in the code biology realm, I would say that the main isotopy, the main semantic nucleus is not the code per se, which is the vehicle, but rather arbitrariness. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I open the discussion about first Anna, and then.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this talk. Very much up my alley of interests. In terms of the face, infants will focus on a piece of paper with a circle, 2 dots, and a line. It seems to be the first schema that is impressed. The second point I wanted to make is that the first form of semiotic communication are signals, and they are emotional expressions. The face is part of the body, right? So in evolution, it was the emotional expressions of our species as animals that is the beginning. Code biology requires a developmental evolutionary progression from emotional signals to language, the beginning of language, to cultural and social codes. This is the continuity.
No, yes, I think we collected the... Thank you so much for the comment. I totally agree about the continuity and like these moments in the history of conceiving this kind of phenomena, passing the baton one to the other, okay? And also I totally agree about the impossibility to detach the face from the body. Because, for example, a lot of things that we commonly conceive as facial expressions, like the one that I'm doing now actually, are possible thanks to the interaction, for example, with the hands. So there are some devices that I would call parafacial, like paratext, that help, enhance, or boost what the face may already say, but not without the cooperation of the whole body. So I totally agree, it would be artificial to conceive a physiognomy without a study of the body as a whole.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That's a very fascinating presentation, really. Very impressive one. I think it's also a very interesting code.
Yes, because the mic is not.
Oh. He's worked. Anyway, so it's. I think the interesting point about face that there's a cultural convention about what faces are, which influences our perception. So it's culturally specific. Roman Jakobson tells the story about indigenous people who say that their whole bodies are the face. That's why they're naked. So face is the publicly exposed device for public interaction. But at the same time, there's another convention, and which is also part of a different social code, that faces should somehow express emotions. And then there's overlapping, conflicting convention that it shouldn't express too many emotions, or they shouldn't express them in conventional way. Yeah. Just now in National Gallery in Dublin, there's an exhibition called Faces about the face portraits of the 17th, 18th century and the emotion expression. So I think this is a circular code if we use the terms used before, because it's always readjusted. It's readjusted, and also, so the expression is readjusted to public conventions, but it also is supposed to express emotions. It can also move in the other direction from the signifier to signified, because we know that if you, let's say, feign or fake a smile, you will also feel positive emotions. That's a physiological experiment which was made some time ago. So there's this circle adjustment of expression of the signifier to the signified, which is kind of influenced by those conflicting and overlapping functions. So I think it's really fascinating object of research, and I don't think it's totally arbitrary in my understanding, because if we think of the tripartite classification of science and in Charles Peirce, facial communication, facial science definitely in part indexes, because they can influence the body of the face, let's say, face bearer directly. Yeah. So I think this is a tricky combination of arbitrary and non-arbitrary, in my view. But thanks very much.
Really quickly, thanks a lot. I totally agree about the trickiness of the indexicality, because this is a big struggle happening underneath the most interesting semiotic things that you can read today. And definitely the face is a point where all these things converge and maybe collapse, because you cannot get rid of the face for many reasons, and precisely because of the indexicality of the face. But at the same time, this is precisely the point that people criticizing the untouchability of the face are against. For example, there is this American author called Sharrona Pearl, who is a specialized media scholar studying in a medical humanities perspective disfigurement, so visible difference, and she opens the book, or the conclusions of the book, saying fuck the index, because she also is an activist. So it's precisely the point of struggle between all these different forces. And I wanted quickly to say two things. The face in media studies, in representational communication, I would say, is definitely something that is not related if we take into account the separation between semantics, syntax, and pragmatics. It's something completely related to syntax. It's just a positional device. It's not something containing things, stricto sensu, because we can go from the round circle with the 2 points and the line, obviously, but at the same time, if I put on a social media as a avatar of my account the picture of my cat or the flag of a given country, I am explicitly addressing to the social codes in the public space that for a certain amount of time that picture should be considered as my face, as a token, as a synecdoche of my identity. So it's a really strong syntactic element. And then, yes, the expression content, a lot of people working on mindfulness, wellness in general, or coaching, self-help and stuff like that, say in order to be happy you have to smile. So in order to recreate this feedback on the expression, from the expression to the content, which is interesting. It's a short circuit because obviously we think that it happens the other way around normally. Thank you, thanks a lot.
Okay. Okay, so if there are no other questions, I declare closed the session, also the scientific session of this 10th World Congress in code biology. Now, a very short ceremony of closure. I ask to Vice President of our Accademia. Then, sorry? No, lo facciamo dopo quello. Facciamo dopo, poi chiudiamo. E poi partiamo. Then, after the salutation, we open the session dedicated to the new Congress and the General Assembly. So I think that this could be diplomatically the best solution, and then we can work for 2 hours or 4 hours about our code biology problem. So I ask to Professor Cozzani. Yeah, sì, un momento. Yeah. Lucas,
Good afternoon.
devi accendere?
È acceso, sì, mi sembra di sì.
Sì.
Ok, gli altri sono spenti. At the end of this interesting meeting, the code biology, non si sente? Oh, posso mica mangiarlo. The code biology 2024. I have to say the satisfaction of Accademia Capellini for this interesting meeting. I have understand the importance of these arguments. Accademia Capellini is a scientific academy, and in our motto latino, natura duce, comite scientia, la scienza come amica, the science as a friend. I hope that your stay in La Spezia was satisfying, and I think a particular ringraziamento al professore Almofarina, che è stato un po' l'organizzatore, the organization. Ma all of your report have been very interesting. I prefer my bad English, it is very difficult for me, and I prefer speak in Italian language e poi magari farina di translate. L'Accademia Capellini è orientata verso le scienze naturali, quindi biologia, ecologia, etologia, botanica, lo studio delle particelle della fisica che hanno condotto alla scoperta del bosone di Higgs per capire l'universo, perché la scienza deve essere per l'uomo al servizio della conoscenza. E io penso che tutti voi che avete partecipato a questo convegno abbiate dentro il fuoco della scienza e quindi l'interesse dell'uomo per conoscere, non in modo superficiale, ma in modo approfondito, deeply, proprio all'interno, entrare dentro per capire. Ecco, questa è un po' la filosofia della scienza, come deve essere intesa. Io mi auguro che quando ritornerete nelle vostre città, nei vostri paesi, abbiate un ricordo simpatico e buono di questo breve soggiorno in La Spezia. Grazie a voi.
Okay. A short translation. The hope to a good memory of La Spezia location. This is the last sentence. And one of the first sentences, that's Accademia Capellini is extremely interested in science, in geology, botany, ecology, in physical science, and our academy staff is composed by people that are scientists spread everywhere in Italy. And this is the reason of La Capellini Academy existence, the life motive, to maintain at a high level the scientific interest toward the community, because this Accademia is for the La Spezia and Lunigiana surroundings. And this is our mission. Okay. So thank you very much for your stay in La Spezia and to have participated to this meeting. So this is the end of the conference, and now we start with a new conference proposal. Adesso
before I start with, with the introduction to the new conference, I would like to thank the Academy for hosting us and enabling us to have this conference in La Spezia. It was a great pleasure, and we really enjoyed being here and participated in the Academy activities, as well as presenting what we do and about code biology and what can be the applications for the benefit of scientific research and colleagues. Now I will give you a short description of the 11th conference. It will be in Zagreb from 10th to 14th June, and it will be hosted by the Faculty of Philosophy and Religious Studies of the University of Zagreb. The mission of the faculty is to make bridges and cultivate the interaction between religious studies programs and life sciences, and to develop a dialogue with modern world and society. Within the main building, they have 3 lecture halls, a lot of seminars, meeting rooms, library, and a little restaurant for the students and the teachers. So the faculty is close to a town center. Zagreb is the capital of Croatia, and it has a good access from Central Europe. It's rather near to Italy, Austria, Germany, Hungary, Serbia, and other countries. So I think that there won't be much difficulties with the transfer to Zagreb, with the travel. The program and the coffee breaks will take place at one of the faculty's lecture halls, and it can easily accommodate up to 100 people, so we don't have to worry about the space. It will be at our disposal during the whole conference, and close to it is a small restaurant for students and teachers, so we will be also able to, we can use it freely, and the coffee breaks will take place there. These are some pictures of the university itself. Some seminar rooms, library. So they have also Wi-Fi, so everything will be at our disposal. Of course, we have, if we need some seminar rooms and so on, it will be possible to arrange it and announce it. As I said, Zagreb is the capital of Croatia. Just a few pictures. This is the main the main square, for example. Near the main square there is a Capitol with a cathedral. I will come to a certain point because at one of I will show it later, there is a possible hosting of people in one of the Capitol manors. Then very near it's a National Theatre, St. Mark's Church, and Park Zrinjevac, which is near the railway station. This is a look to the main cathedral in the center of the town. And near it, there is in one of the Capitol manors, there is a small hotel adapted, so there is a possibility for staying. It's often used for professors and others who are guests for the university and theological university as well, which is situated on Capitol. Surrounding Zagreb around Zagreb there is a national park, Sljeme and Medvedgrad. This is an old town, so we will have also visit there, and we arrange some touring and seeing the seaside of Zagreb, especially Sljeme and Medvednica are very, very nice. The ski cup has been also there during the winter. Now there we have a problem with the snow, so for the last 2 years it wasn't there, but still there are a lot of nice spots to see. In any case, I hope that you will have nice staying in Zagreb, and that we will manage to organize it in a simple and efficient manner as you did here, and that you will have the same good time and company, and that you will like it as well. Thank you once again for the whole Academy help and for being a kind host for our conference. Thank you.
Well, Marcello, ora abbiamo l'assemblea, il General Assembly. O abbiamo l'assemblea generale adesso? O non? Perché c'era scritto General Assembly. This is a General Assembly. Okay. On the program there was written General Assembly, but this is the end. So I open the discussion about the end.
Just about. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for attending the conference. I very much look forward to seeing you again in Zagreb next year, and I think, yes, I know.
I think we should thank Marcello for years of leadership. If he's now going to pass the gavel to you, he should be a little bit more ceremonious.
Well, thank you very much, and it has been a pleasure to have you here, and I sincerely hope that we will see you next year in Zagreb. Hope you have a nice time in La Spezia, and this is it. This is the end of a series of conferences and the beginning of a new one. So, okay.
So we have come to an end. Before ending, I would like to thank Ms. Olympia Cecchi for all the efforts and organization and being so helpful and kind. Thank you very much. And of course to Alma Farina, who was and the Vice President of the Academy. Thank you.
Naturally, grandi ringraziamenti al professor Almofarina, ma vorrei dire anche alla nostra amica e cara collega che ha aiutato molto il professor Farina nell'organizzazione di questo meeting. Quindi grazie Olimpia, Olimpia Cecchi, per quello che hai fatto, perché sei stata molto molto importante.
Vorrei ringraziare tutti voi per essere venuti. Spero che la mia presenza vi sia stata utile in tutti questi 3 giorni in cui ci siamo conosciuti, non tutti, ma insomma ci siamo abbastanza conosciuti. E vi auguro di tornare alla Spezia, magari non soltanto per la vostra assemblea, ma anche per vedere tutte le nostre bellezze. E se volete un giorno fare riferimento all'Accademia Capellini, è sempre presente, ok? D'accordo? Tutto qua. Buon proseguimento, arrivederci. Ok, adesso potete fare l'assemblea e io vado via.
Notice, but I don't. This one is a little bit different than the one I haven't known.
It's a different system.
Do you want to keep the presentation? No presentation. Do you want to keep the?
Yes, you can go.
Okay. No, I have it. Just ask.
You have it?
Yeah. So. That's it.
Yeah, more or less.
We got so used to English that I have a problem at home with Croatian. I don't know.
I understand.
sì. Ah, ok. The last coffee break. Go on. Coffee break. Sì.
My congratulations. You did a very good job. I really
Come back safe.
Yeah, sure.
We are friends, despite everything. We are friends.
Of course. Absolutely.
Crazy time, but not for us. Have you a good trip back?
Posso quando me ne dai?
Ora. Mi hai detto a fine sessione. Eccoli. Arrivo. Ora. Quello che mi dici io faccio, quasi sempre. Quasi sempre,
Grazie a lei.
È il cancelliere dell'Accademia. Cancelliere.
Come carica, mi chiamo Franco. Ok,
Buon anno.
dei pubblicazioni. Allora, se di là hanno preparato.
E allora andiamo.
Sì, se glielo dici.
Gliel'abbiamo già detto. E se non si muovono. Yes, coffee break now. Olimpia, accompagnali perché non vanno. Dai. Nulla, Anna, ciao. Altrettanto. Speriamo. Certo. Sì, vengo. Ok, ci siamo. Eccoli, sono a posto. Io comunque ne ho poche, Capito Marcello? Ce n'ho una coppia, nel caso che, perché qui si lavori, se si dovesse guastare qualcosa, noi siamo qua.